The day my daughter-in-law told me I wasn't allowed to use my own living room, I didn't say a word. I just nodded, walked back to my bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. That night, I made a phone call that changed everything. But let me back up. My name is Eugene. I am 64 years old, retired after 31 years as a civil engineer with the county of Fulton, Georgia. My wife Sandra passed 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the end. When she died, something in the house died too. Every room had her in it. The kitchen still smelled like her coffee. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I couldn't move them for 6 months. My daughter, Joanna, called me every day after the funeral. She and her husband, Kevin, lived about 20 minutes away in Marietta. Good neighborhood, decent house, 2 incomes. Kevin worked in logistics management. Joanna was a dental hygienist. No kids yet. Plenty of space. About 8 months after Sandra passed, Joanna started a new conversation. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone in that big house. Dad, what if something happens and no one's nearby? Dad, we have the guest room. It's just sitting there." I told her no the first 3 times. I was fine. I had friends at church. I had my woodworking shop in the garage. I had a routine. But the truth is, the routine felt hollow. I'd make dinner for one and realize I'd cooked enough for 2 out of pure muscle memory. I'd watch the news and have no one to argue with about it. Little things like that wore me down more than I admitted. By the following spring, I agreed. Temporary, I told myself. Just for a few months, until I figured out what I actually wanted. I put the family home in storage, rented it out to a young couple, and moved my essentials into Joanna's guest room. The first 2 weeks were fine. Kevin was pleasant enough at dinner. He worked long hours, came home tired, ate, watched television. I stayed out of the way. I helped with groceries, fixed the garbage disposal that had been grinding for months, repainted the front porch railing. I thought I was contributing. I thought I had an understanding. The first sign I missed was small. I'd gotten up early one Saturday, around 6, and made a pot of coffee. Kevin came downstairs around 7, looked at the coffee, looked at me, and said, "I like to have the kitchen to myself in the mornings." Not meanly, just flatly, like he was telling me the Wi-Fi password. I said, "Sure, no problem," and took my cup to the back porch. But it didn't stop there. Over the following weeks, more rules appeared. Not written rules. Kevin's rules. He didn't like the television volume above a certain level before 9 in the morning. He didn't want me parking in the left half of the driveway because that was his spot, even though only 1 car could fit in the garage, and that was Joanna's. He didn't like me having phone calls in the living room because he worked from home on Fridays and the noise broke his concentration, even when he was in his office with the door shut. I adjusted. I kept adjusting. I told myself it was his home, his space, his comfort. I was the guest. That's what guests do. Joanna noticed some of it, but not all of it. When I brought things up gently, she'd get this look on her face. Not defensive exactly, more like tired. She'd say, "Dad, you know how he is. He just needs his space." I'd heard that phrase so many times it had worn grooves into me. The living room incident happened on a Tuesday evening in October. I'd been there about 6 months by then. Kevin had some friends over to watch a football game. 4 guys I'd never met. Loud beer on my coffee table, which he'd moved from storage into their house without asking. I went downstairs to get water and said hello. One of the guys, friendly enough, asked me to sit down and watch the game with them. Kevin looked at me. "We've got it covered in here, Eugene." That was it. 5 words. "I've got it covered in here." I went back upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. I want you to understand something. I spent 31 years engineering infrastructure that still stands. I raised a daughter who turned out kind, mostly. I nursed my wife through 4 months of dying without falling apart, at least not where anyone could see. I am not a man without backbone. But grief does something to you. It makes you smaller for a while, more willing to accept things you'd never have accepted before, because you're already so tired from carrying the weight of the loss that fighting one more battle feels like too much. That night, I called my accountant, a man named Stewart, who'd handled my taxes for 15 years. I asked him a simple question. What can I do with the money I've been sitting on? Sandra and I had been careful our whole lives. We didn't spend foolishly. The house rental income was adding up. My pension, her life insurance, some investments we'd made in our 40s. The total picture was more comfortable than Kevin apparently realized, because if he had realized it, I suspect he would have been a great deal more careful with me. Stewart said, "Eugene, what are you thinking?" I told him I was thinking about buying some property. There was a vacant lot 2 houses down from Kevin and Joanna's place. I'd noticed it for months. Corner lot, about 1/3 of an acre, sold at tax auction 2 years back and sitting unused ever since. I'd looked it up once out of idle curiosity. The county listing showed it zoned mixed-use residential commercial, which meant in plain English that you could build more than just a house on it. I called a real estate attorney named Philip the next morning. He was thorough, asked the right questions, and told me mixed-use zoning in that particular part of Cobb County would allow for a short-term rental property with an event space component, provided certain setback and noise ordinance conditions were met. He said it with the neutral efficiency of a man who explains these things for a living, but I noticed he paused after he said it. Like even he understood what that meant in context. I bought the lot 43 days later. Cash, $94,000. I didn't tell Joanna. I hired a contractor named Bud, a man I'd worked with on county projects years ago. Thorough and quiet and not given to gossip. We drew up plans for a small but well-built structure, a 2-bedroom short-term rental with a detached outdoor pavilion suitable for events, gatherings, parties, weekend celebrations, things with music, but estimated 14 months to complete. I told him I wasn't in a hurry. In the meantime, life at Kevin and Joanna's continued. I got quieter. Kevin got more comfortable with the rules. Joanna and I had a good relationship when Kevin wasn't in the room, which I noticed more and more was the condition under which our best conversations happened. She'd come find me in the backyard on evenings he was watching television, and we'd talk about her mother, about her job, about small things. Those conversations were the reason I stayed as long as I did, but the financial interference started in February. Kevin had overheard a phone call. I hadn't been careful. I was in the kitchen. He'd come home early. I was talking to Stewart about reinvesting some of the returns from my portfolio. Nothing exotic, routine management. But Kevin heard numbers. After I hung up, he came into the kitchen and leaned against the counter with his arms folded. "How much are you actually worth, Eugene?" I looked at him. "That's a private matter, Kevin. I'm just asking because Joanna and I have been covering a lot of extra costs since you moved in. Groceries, utilities." I told him I had been giving Joanna $400 a month since I moved in, which I had been, quietly, because I didn't want to feel like a burden. She had never mentioned it to him, apparently, which told me something. He said, "That doesn't really cover it." I said, "What number did you have in mind?" He named one. It was not a reasonable number. I went back to my room, called Philip the attorney, and asked him what steps were involved in formally establishing a life estate on my rental property back in Sandy Springs, while simultaneously ensuring that certain assets were placed in a revocable trust with terms I specified. Philip said, "Are we protecting against something specific?" I said, "I'm being thorough." That spring, construction on the lot began. I drove by it every few days. The foundation went down in April. Bud ran a tight crew, no wasted time. By June, the framing was up, and Joanna drove past it one afternoon and mentioned to me at dinner that someone was building something down the street. I said, "I noticed that." Kevin looked up from his plate. "What are they putting in?" Not sure, I said. It looks residential. He went back to his food. The thing about secrets is that they change you a little, carrying them. Not badly. I didn't feel guilty exactly. I felt like myself again. Like the version of me who had plans, who made decisions, who didn't ask permission to pour a cup of coffee in the morning. Sandra would have understood that. She knew the difference between the two versions of me better than anyone. In August, Kevin escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. He found out. I still don't know exactly how, possibly through Joanna checking something on a shared tablet, that I had not paid the increased amount he'd asked for. I had continued paying Joanna the $400 directly. He came to my bedroom door, knocked twice, and came in without waiting. You haven't been paying what we agreed on. I said, we didn't agree on anything. You named a number. I didn't respond to it. He said, you're living in our house, Eugene. You don't get to just ignore what we ask. The word ask was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I told him calmly that I would begin looking at other arrangements. He said that would probably be best. I said I agreed. I called Bud that night. How much longer? Bud said. 10 weeks, maybe 12. Interior finishing is all that's left. I said, push it to 8 if you can. He pushed it to 9. The property was finished the first week of October, 14 months after I'd bought the lot, and almost exactly a year to the day after Kevin told me he had it covered in here. I'd furnished it myself. Good quality, nothing ostentatious, comfortable and clean. The outdoor pavilion had a small covered stage, string lighting, picnic tables, a gravel lot that could hold about 20 cars. I listed the house on 2 short-term rental platforms and hired a local event coordinator, Patricia. Actually, no, her name was Donna, and she found the first booking within 4 days. A 50th birthday party, 40 guests, a country music cover band. The party was on a Saturday evening in mid-October. I sat in a chair inside my rental house and listened through the window. The band was good. The lights were warm. People were laughing in my backyard. 2 houses from Kevin and Joanna's bedroom window. My phone rang at 9:43. It was Joanna. Dad, there's a party happening down the street. It is extremely loud. I said, I know. Pause. What do you mean you know? I told her all of it. The lot, the purchase, the build, the trust, the life estate on my Sandy Springs property. All of it. I was calm. I wasn't triumphant. I was just done carrying it. The silence on the other end lasted a long time. She said, Dad, why didn't you tell me? I said, because I needed to do something for myself, Joanna. And I knew if I said it out loud, it would become a conversation with Kevin before it became a decision by me. She was quiet again. Then softly, he doesn't know it's yours? Not yet. Kevin found out the next morning. I'm not certain how, but I suspect Joanna told him that night after they hung up with me, and the reality of it settled overnight into the particular shape of rage that small men develop when something they thought they'd controlled turns out to have been 10 steps ahead of them the whole time. He knocked on my door at 7 in the morning. I was already dressed. I'd been expecting this. You bought the property down the street. I did. You're going to have events there? With bands? On weekends? It's zoned for it. I've already spoken with the county. I'm within every applicable noise ordinance, provided events end by 11. He stared at me. You did this to get back at us. I said, I did this because I'm 64 years old, and I spent a year being told where to sit in a house I was helping pay for, and I decided I'd rather put my money into something that was entirely mine. He said something then that I won't repeat, mostly because it doesn't deserve to be. Then he said, you need to find somewhere else to live. You've got 2 weeks. I said, that's fine. I'll be moving into the rental property. He hadn't considered that. I took 3 trips with my truck and was out by the following weekend. Bud helped me move the furniture I wanted. I set up my woodworking tools in the garage. I made a pot of coffee the first morning and drank it in the middle of my own living room in absolute silence, and it was the best cup of coffee I'd had in 2 years. The event business picked up through the fall and into the holidays. Donna was good at her job and word spread. Graduation parties, anniversaries, a wedding reception in November, a retirement party in December with a jazz trio that played until 10:58 and not a minute passed. I watched that one from the porch, a glass of bourbon in my hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Joanna called me in December. Kevin wasn't home. I could tell by the way she spoke, looser, more herself. She said, "Dad, I want to apologize. I kept telling you to work around him, and I shouldn't have." I told her what I'd been thinking for a while. That I didn't blame her entirely. That grief makes you accept things you shouldn't, and that I'd let it go on longer than I should have. That none of that was her fault. She cried a little. I let her. Then she said, "Can I come see the place?" "Any time," I said. "I'll make coffee." She came on a Sunday morning without Kevin. We sat in the backyard where the pavilion was, the string lights still up from a party the night before, and she told me things she hadn't been able to say while I was living under his roof, about how he managed the finances at home, about certain other things. I listened without interrupting. I told her about the trust I'd set up and what it meant for her and for me. I told her she'd never be without options, whatever she decided about her life. She cried again. So did I, a little. I'm 64, not made of stone. The tenant in my Sandy Springs house, the young couple, they signed another year. My pension covers my modest expenses. The event rental covers more than I expected. Stuart is satisfied with the portfolio picture. I'm sitting on my own back porch as I write this. It's a Sunday in January, cold enough for a jacket, but not bad. My woodworking shop is 2 steps away. There's nothing on the calendar until next weekend. A baby shower, 60 guests, a caterer Donna found who does a fantastic spread. Kevin, as far as I know, is still in Marietta. I don't ask. Joanna comes by every week or two. She's figuring things out. That's all I'll say about that. When Sandra got sick, one of the last things she said to me, we were sitting in the hospital room, 3rd week of November, the window showing a parking garage. But the light was nice anyway. She said, "You're going to be all right. You always find your way back to yourself." I didn't believe her then. I was too scared of what was coming. She was right, though. She was almost always right. I think about Kevin's face a lot. Not with anger. That passed a long time ago. I think about it the way you think about a hard winter. It happened, it shaped things, and then it ended. What I understand now, sitting on this back porch with a cup of coffee and nothing pressing on my calendar until Saturday, is that everything that unfolded between us followed a logic as simple and reliable as gravity. Kevin treated me the way he did because he believed I would keep absorbing it, and for a long time I did. Not because I lacked self-respect, but because grief had made me patient in ways I hadn't intended. When you sat with someone while they were dying, when you come home to a house that still holds the shape of a person who's no longer in it, small humiliations feel manageable. You save your strength for what you think matters. But here's what I got wrong. The capacity to endure something is not the same as the wisdom to accept it. Those are 2 different things, and I confused them for nearly a year. The decision that changed everything wasn't the purchase. It was the phone call to Stuart the night Kevin told me I had it covered in here. That was the moment I chose to think clearly instead of just patiently. I stopped asking what I could tolerate and started asking what I actually wanted. That shift from endurance to intention is the one that matters. Anyone can outlast a bad situation. Not everyone has the clear-headedness to quietly build a better one while it's still going on. I also had to reckon with something I didn't like about myself. I had let things go too long because confrontation felt costly. I'd watched Joanna get worn down by that household and told myself it wasn't my place to say anything. That wasn't kindness. That was avoidance dressed up as respect. Real care for the people you love sometimes means being honest when it's uncomfortable, setting a boundary when it costs you something, saying plainly what you will and won't accept. I wasn't doing that. I was being agreeable and calling it grace. The strength to actually move, to buy the lot, to plan quietly, to follow through over 14 months without flinching. That came from somewhere older than the conflict with Kevin. It came from 31 years of showing up to work and solving problems that had real consequences. From nursing Sandra without falling apart. From knowing somewhere underneath the grief and the exhaustion that I was still the same man who had built things and made decisions and followed through. That knowledge doesn't go away. It just gets buried sometimes. You have to choose to dig it back up. What happened to Kevin was simply the natural result of his own choices catching up with him. He spent a year underestimating a man he'd never bothered to actually see. The outcome was proportional. Joanna comes by on Sunday mornings now. We drink coffee in the backyard, sometimes without saying much at all. Sandra would have liked this version of things, I think. Not the conflict that led to it. She'd have had words for Kevin that I'm too polite to repeat. But the Sunday mornings, the porch, the string lights still up from the night before. She always said I find my way back to myself. She wasn't wrong.